Hey guys, Brian Stevens here with the National Real Estate Post. I have Dave Stevens, a regular participant in what we talk about to really kind of untie some of the more complicated issues that the mortgage market is really talking about and dealing with on a regular basis. Today we're talking because Mark Calabria, the past head of the FHFA, came out and said that we're on a ticking time bomb, that the mortgage market is basically going to have massive problems in front of us, and that's based on the book of business that FHA wrote. Now, the last time I checked, Dave, and I could be wrong on this, but I think the average credit score of an FHA borrower right now is somewhere to the tune of 680 to 720. I mean, it's a pretty decent book of business. And he mentioned how nobody has skin in the game with, a 3% down payment, yet everybody is dealing with massive equity on a level that we've never seen in the history of this country. So when I hear him say that, my knee-jerk reaction is he's out of tune with what's going on. But there's another part of me that says, what am I missing right now? Like, where is the housing market going to fall apart?
Yeah, I responded in a public interview, as did Mark Zandi and another guy named Jim Parrott, who's very well known in inside the Beltway and used to work on the National Economic Council for the president. But and we all kind of said the same thing out of coincidence about the market. Look, we have the healthiest screwed up market you could ever be in, right? And this goes all the way back to COVID. When we went into COVID, we had really amazing credit conditions. We came out of COVID with an economy literally on fire, so strong that the Fed is now using all its abilities to stop this thing before it has an even worse outcome. And by the way, they're doing a really good job doing that. But people are misreading a lot of information. I mean, if you want to look at just one simple picture here, this is from a presentation given by Moody's Analytics, which is the big ratings agency in New York, to a whole bunch of analysts this week, and it just shows where we are in housing. So I just want you to compare this slide to the Great Recession. The Great Recession of 2008 was a very different scenario. First of all, FICO scores, which is the green bar, were significantly lower, and homeownership equity was also significantly lower. Today we have, and this is identified in this bar, this chart identifies the green areas, the percent of mortgage debt to borrowers with credit scores that are less than 700, okay? So it's a percent of borrowers who have credit scores less than 700. If you go down to 2008 during the Great Recession, 65% of all borrowers had a sub 700 FICO. Today it's down, somewhere around 22%. So pretty incredible scenario. And when you look at homeownership equity, in terms of overall equity in the country compared to that period of time, it's enormous. By the way, we have more home equity than has ever existed in America today. Now, look, a lot of people, and you and I talked a little bit beforehand, a lot of people want to, I don't care what the data says, I still feel this way.
Right.
It's sort of that's the nature of our world today. It's all the world of fake news, and I don't trust science and math. But the thing I will tell you is, will we have higher delinquencies? Likely, but I'll even give you fresh off the presses from FHA, because they just released their monthly report, which FHA publishes on their website every single month. And it's a performance report on FHA, but the total delinquency increased 11 basis points. Delinquency doesn't mean foreclosure. Delinquencies, 30-day delinquencies, are the predominant part of the delinquency number. They increased from 9.69 to 9.8, which is a few basis points, still lower than February of 2020. Now, why February of 2020 is important is that's pre-COVID, right? We shut down in March. So we were, everything was still going in February 2020. I would argue February 2020 was a pretty damn healthy economy before COVID, with rates dropping for other reasons, and that delinquency rate in February was 10.61. So there's a variety of things happening here. One is the reason why I take issue with Calabria, and why I think while there's weakness in the housing market, and there will be, and we're likely to see home price appreciation go down to probably near flat, maybe a couple basis points of appreciation for a while, is has to do with, shortness of supply, increases in interest rates, consumer sentiment, which is down, and all of that is frankly scaring the hell out of potential home buyers. They're backing away a bit. We have increased inventory. I can show you another slide on that in a minute if you want to see it, that the Fed just released. But supply now, we have about a 9-month supply of housing stock. We're just literally, and that's the full April report. For the March report, we had about 6 months supply, and literally 6 months ago we had 2 months supply. So the supply of housing is increasing. By the way, that data point, if anyone wants to check it, is go to the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, FRED, F-R-E-D, and you can track the month's supply of housing in America, and that's really the listing volume. That's just listed currently on MLS sites across the country. Just real quick, all I want to say is the dynamics that are shaping what will produce a net outcome from the Fed's actions post-pandemic, probably some form of recession and beyond, are still not enough to do anything, any way, shape, or form that the Great Recession did. And that has to do with credit quality, current equity positions of American homeowners today, saving statistics of what Americans hold in savings banks, all the ex-post Dodd-Frank stuff, that all this stuff is QM, when before they were negams and subprime 228s, 327, pay option arms, whatever. It's just, you have to look at the data that's the underpinning of the market that we're in today.
So when I read what Calabria wrote, and again, I'm a simpleton, but I look at this stuff on a daily basis. I do, and
Sure.
and I'm seeing a world that is entirely different than his. The cleanest book of business we've ever written, more equity than we've ever had. The most meat and potato type of loans that we've ever had. We're just doing Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie with a small sprinkling of non-QM right now. And I guess the question I have is something I read is have we gotten to a point to where our credit availability index with the Mortgage Bankers Association has tightened up so much? I kind of feel like we need to go in the other direction. Should we start looking at not only just interest-only loans, but all the old NEGAM loans? Do those have a place in the market that we're dealing with right now? And are those some of the solutions that should be on the table? Seriously, I kind of think it does.
I do think, look, you're a Californian. I'm a former Californian. I grew up working for a California S&L doing pay option arms. There has to be a better focus on affordability. And you watch, as we're talking today, Sandra Thompson on the 25th of May will be confirmed by the Senate today. She just passed cloture, and we will have a full-time permanent director of the FHFA. Really important, because what Sandra could do had some limitations as acting director. And I think she's going to really focus significantly on affordability and access in some of the moves she makes for the exact reason. And if I can say nothing else, just think about the term cross subsidy. So the best cross subsidy we have in federal lending programs is the FHA. Cross subsidy means that you could be godlike with an 850 FICO and a 50 LTV, and if you decide to get an FHA loan, which you wouldn't, but if you did, right, you would get the same rate, fee, everything as the 620 FICO borrower putting 3% down. That's a true cost subsidy, where the better credits subsidize the weaker credits. The GSEs, on a pure credit risk model, the way they operate, there's really no room for entry level or first-time home buyers, particularly anybody with a wrinkle in their lives. As you all know, as loan officers, if you have any of that, the trade away to FHA is somewhere in the low 700s in the FICO band. If you have a really low down payment, because between LLPAs and MIP, it just doesn't work. And so this is something that I promise you, Sandra will focus on as FHFA director. And keep in mind, gang, Julia Gordon just got confirmed a few days ago, last Friday, to head the FHA. She is going to reduce MIPs. I promise you. That's a fact, guaranteed.
Right there.
Yes, I promise you she will do that. I'm not sure she's going to do it across the board. I think she's trying to finesse it in odd ways, But I think in the end of the day, she'll do various forms of across the board MIP cuts because she knows they're priced too high, given any scenario of increased defaults that could occur on the FHA program. That premium that they're collecting today is so high. I put most of the premiums in place when I was commissioner, and I had to pass a law to get my ability to raise them even further. Those premiums are able to withstand a near 20% actual default rate, not just delinquency rate. And so, they're just, it's too much and it's turning them into a profit center. And so I think you'll see some action on both sides there that's going to move the dial a bit. And I think the good news is we now have a actual confirmed commissioner, which is what Secretary Fudge was waiting for. And we have an actual confirmed FHFA director because her hands were somewhat tied in terms of how far she'd go in PSPA modifications, preferred stock purchase agreement modifications, for the GSEs, how more specifically she could drive GSE affordable housing goals. And they're going to release that plan in the next few days, I believe. And what she could do to a more targeted cross-subsidy effort that will reduce some of the LLPA buckets for first-time home buyers with lower FICOs. And that will probably increase perhaps some of the LLPA buckets down on the better quality side of the grid in order to allow the GSEs to do more affordable lending. I also expect in the plan that they'll release over the next few days to see things around manufactured housing and things of this sort. But that all of this is going to come from two confirmed new heads of two critical agencies that we don't pay much attention to out on the street. You just worry about what rates your secondary marketing officer is going to give you or your investor's giving you. But in the end of the day, they really matter because what secondary can provide, at least as it relates to the government programs, it depends a lot on what these two individuals decide to do.
So you're seeing decisions coming that you think are going to be swift and transformative in terms of what we're doing right now with the GSEs and with HUD.
Yeah, I mean, swift in government talk, but here over the next couple of months, I think you'll see the initial steps, and think about it this way, guys. Mike Fratantoni, the chief economist for Freddie Mac, wrote a really good article at Housing Wire this week, where he said Fannie and Freddie are not price takers in the marketplace. A price taker, by definition, would be if UWM decides to lower rates even subpar, the other wholesalers probably have to get close to that. They have to take that price and compete with it. Otherwise, they don't do loans. A price maker is what the GSEs are. They don't have real competition per se. They match themselves against their counterparty, which is Freddie versus Fannie and vice versa. But they're price makers and they don't really have to compete, except if FHA lowers the MIP, that's going to even lower even further the trade away FICO that might, if 720 today below on a 5% down loan means FHA is best X. If they lower premiums by X and it now turns out that a 680 or 690 FICO is best X for FHA, the GSEs are now going to have to be at some level price takers, meaning they're going to have to do something about pricing in order to not lose all that affordable business, because they have housing goals that they are going to have to meet, and they're barely doing well in that space today. They can't lose more ground there. So in that sense, we're going to see some interesting dynamics depending what FHA does first.
Kind of out of left field, I don't even know if this needs to make it into the show, but one of the topics that I've been looking at over the past couple of weeks that is just has me scratching my head is Freddie Mac talking about targeted loans and coming out with a new product, a new process with targeted loans. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Targeted loans meaning affordable loans?
Targeted loans, yes. Very, very specifically, targeting loans towards underserved communities.
Absolutely. I could absolutely see them doing this. There's been a desire in proposed legislative efforts. You did not see them, but on the infrastructure bill, the Build Back Better bill, which never got passed, and I don't think it can in a midterm election year, but even as in a scaled down version, it'll be tough enough. But there was a piece of legislation in there coming out of the House Financial Services Committee, which had an effort to provide down payment assistance to based on percentage of area median income. And that in itself is a way to essentially back in to census tracts. But the other way to do that is actually to specify census tracts. So you could come up with a product model that takes where the model builds out a census tract outcome that says this list of census tracts has an average AMI, average median income below X.
Right.
And so this product will be available for those census tracts. And as such, we'll have some form of subsidy, both in pricing and credit to get originators providing those. You might see those in a housing plan. I mean, one thing that I'm sure most of you are not aware of because you don't live your life in this gobbledygook and you're worried more about volume and other things in the business that's happening right now. The GSEs submitted affordable housing goals to FHFA many months ago, and Sandro rejected them. And all out rejected them completely, for both Freddie and Fannie. I've worked at Freddie and been around the GSEs my career, and I've never seen goals just outright rejected. And that's what happened here. So it tells me that they did not go anywhere near far enough. A targeted program is one that I could certainly see being on the table. I'm certain that originators would worry about it. Because operationally, it's really difficult, as you can imagine, if you're do anything in change management or loan origination systems, to come out with something that would present that loan through Encompass or whatever. Suddenly, they'll have to load up a bunch of census tracts to match up against a particular loan product available by a GSE. And more importantly, how will the MIs price them, and will all the lenders want to offer them, and will they be in all systems? So all of this stuff is going to be an interesting dynamic. I'm not sure how they'll do a targeted program. I'm not saying it's going to be census tract driven. It could be strictly an AMI driven program, which has been another proposal. You just take, available to 80 or even 100% of area median income. Even 110 or 120 would make sense, because in area median income, at 120% of area median income, you're still probably closer to an entry-level home buyer. Got a lot of renters in that kind of income space. So, it's just an interesting thing about how all this policy stuff is going to come down the wire.
Well, I mean, what a interesting world that we live in right now. Again, my whole thing is, when I was talking with my team today, I'm like, what am I missing about what's going on right now? It seems to me that all the typical indicators that we used to look at that would basically dictate the direction the market is going to go, that's been all kind of turned upside down right now. And I think that's a lot of the reason for the speculation that we have in terms of...
Well, can I share with you just two things?
Please.
So this is the most recent revised forecast from the Mortgage Bankers Association, just presented at the Legal Issues Conference, which is down in Florida right now as we speak. So it's presented, I think it's being presented today. And Mike Curtis generously sent me his deck so I could use it in the presentation. Look at 2022, guys. Don't bother with the green or yellow bars just yet. Just look at the gray line. The gray line is total origination volume. And as you can see, the forecast for 2022 is $2.5 trillion, which is pretty consistent. He was at about 2.6.5, and he just revised it down to 2.5 based on current market activity that's going on. Now, people freak out because we're coming off of those two $4 trillion numbers, 4.1 and 3.9 the last 2 years. And by the way, that's why you're feeling all the pain, the margin compression, the huge price competition. All of this that's going on right now is just simply resulted, we've lost $1.5 trillion out of the market. But the reality is, take that 2.5 trillion and look to the left. This is going to be the fourth biggest mortgage year in the last 15 years. Fourth biggest mortgage year in the last 15 years, and bigger than anything prior to late 2019, 2020, right? So if you go back to think of your loan rep experience, everything that you've did from a production standpoint, and many of you had pretty good years in those low gray line years, right? During the early teens and the 2009 through 2019 period. Many of you guys had pretty good mortgage years, not like the last two, but you weren't freaking out like we are today. It's all relative, right? The apple falls harder from the highest branch of the tree is sort of my way of describing it. But you're in this year is a good year in a relative sense. What we have to do is right size, but you can't extrapolate the pain that our industry is going through because of all this price compression, massive competition, rate baiting that's going on. I've had someone show me a 30-year fixed rate sheet, got faxed to them today at 3.5%. I wonder, curious how that comes to pass. But that's an extreme that's obviously not even legal probably. But nevertheless, just comparatively speaking, if we all take our proverbial heads out of our you-know-whats, this is overall, comparatively over time, pretty damn good mortgage year. And my forecast next year is actually going to be lower because we're still going to have bumpiness as we move, I hate to say it, into or near recession because of the Fed's actions, and then continued recovery. But I also want you to look at the green bars. The green bars are purchases. And as you know, Frat and Tony's forecast, Frat and Tony is a top PhD economist. Don't underestimate the fact that he works at the Mortgage Bankers Association. That's by coincidence. Okay. He's a brilliant freaking economist. And he has, over the next few years, steady growth in purchase mortgage volume. And so, a lot of the sky is falling stuff that I hear, and I know you attended one of my sessions. I did, whenever it was. I did another one today. I'm doing another one tomorrow to a huge audience. And, it's just, we're being affected. Like, our industry is being uniquely affected because we have an oversupplied industry that's way too damn big. If you figure the market's contracting by about a third, maybe a little over a third, you can just take that math and say, our industry has to contract by a third. Or put another way, the reason why you weren't hurting so bad prior to 2020, even though your volumes were less than they will be this year, the market volume, was that we were a smaller industry. And so we have to really lose about a third of the loan officers out there. And, that may sound controversial to all of you, but I don't think it's you guys. I think people who watch your stuff, Brian, and I'm not kissing your ass, I just says people are interested in the business, and they probably, in general terms, want to learn more and they work harder. There's a lot of loan officers who are in centralized call centers. All they did is answer the phone and pop refis one after the other. That I promise you will not make a living, and they sure as hell aren't going to go out and try to build relationships with realtors. So it's just a very different time. So, if you had some decent years back in the teens, like I showed you in that chart, this is a bigger year. And as we right size, which we will, this industry is really good at right sizing. It's just painful as we go through that process. I think people are going to do fine. But all the data, so look what I showed you a moment ago. One is market volumes are actually going to be pretty good, and purchases are going to continue to grow at a very decent pace. We saw the news today. I don't know when this will come out, but I know you do it pretty quickly. But we saw the news on the 25th, which is the day we're talking, that by Diane Olick, I just saw CNBC, home sales dropped by 16%. Like, the sky is falling. Home sales needed to drop by 16%. They need to drop a little more. And the reason why that is that's what we need to do to slow demand in order to create inventory. And if you look at inventory numbers right now, it's pretty incredible what's happening. So I pulled off the Federal Reserve site this morning. This is March, okay? This is from the Federal Reserve monthly supply of houses in the United States. And you can see it was about a 6-month supply, right? And so then I went today, just a couple hours ago, and I pulled off the April number. Look where it is on the far right. We're at 9 months supply of housing in just a month in terms of single family supply. That's what's going to be needed to meet the incredible demand that's surging our way because demographically speaking, and this is from Zandy's presentation, this is the current population of the United States in 2022 from 0 to 100. And if you look at the peak first-time home buying year in America, which is age 34, look in the red zone, which is the millennial generation, 73 million big. The age 34-year-olds, if you look to the left of age 34 down to 33, 32, up into the high age 20s, each of those cohorts is bigger than age 34, meaning we've got the biggest slug of millennials coming into their peak home buying years from the biggest generation in history that are all going to have to live somewhere. And as I spoke to Zandy about that slide after the presentation he gave in New York a couple of days ago, I said, so if they don't buy, they're going to rent, and rent's already hyperinflated. What does that mean for rental? And he goes, it's really bad for rental. And he goes, rental's going to be, it only makes it harder on rental inflation, which means if I'm a loan rep, I'm taking these slides and you can get them on your own, or if you can't, ask Brian and I'll figure out a way to get them to him. But the reality is I'm going out and talking to everybody in my marketplace saying, don't let a good qualified prospective home buyer make a stupid mistake.
Yep.
I ran numbers on a difference between a 5% rate and a 6% rate today on a 320 home sale with a 20% down payment. Not the normal, maybe you're normal, maybe not normal. The difference is like $100.
Right.
So, I mean, give me a break, you know, go to Starbucks a little less and buy your damn home.
So that's a half a tank of gas.
Yeah, the demand's not going anywhere and the market's normalizing. And all of this is a really good thing. And every forecast like Frat and Tony's that I just showed you assumes that rates are going to stay high, assumes that refis are going to be in the gutter, other than cash outs, which the first slide I showed today should say, God, there's a ton of equity out there.
Right.
We should be able to do stuff there. But, you know, all I say is everything Calabria talked about, this big bubble and the sky's falling. He said a GSC is going to fail in that interview.
It doesn't make
he
sense.
said it's absolute ludicrous. It's preposterous. And frankly, it's like I said in the interview, it's like yelling fire in a crowded theater. It just shouldn't be allowed.
You know, there is one thing I did want to ask you, and I don't have a chance to talk with you that often, so I use every moment that I get. I'm kind of looking at the housing market on the opposite side of what Calabria is when we look at our average credit score with the GSEs and with Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie. When we look at the amount of equity that we have on a regular basis, the fact that everyone is on a 30-year fixed rate loan at 2 7/8 or 3 1/4, whatever the case may be, can there be a point to where we need to have a little bit more breakage in the market? You know, like in a restaurant talk, you want to have a certain level of breakage. You want to have a certain level of inefficiency. You want to have a certain level of defaults that are frankly just kind of healthy. Have we gotten to the point to where we are so adverse to any type of breakage that we've allowed the Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie to become way too conservative in what they're doing? And shouldn't we look at like our defaults as low as they are right now is something that's frankly unhealthy?
Well, it's interesting because if I was really talking to my chief risk officer, my lender today, we don't know what's going to happen with the Fed's moves, and ultimately if we move into recession and what that will mean in terms of unemployment and potential default rates. I would argue that we have so much equity in most of the homes in America because this is a unique phenomenon over the last 2 years that literally every metropolitan market showed significant home price gains. So that they can get out. It's not like we're going to see mass foreclosures, but we will see transition in home ownership. But let's assume there's some fear there, some concern about higher default rates. Even with that in place, to your point, Brian, and we've talked about this for years. In my jobs when I ran the single family business at Freddie, we'd have these discussions about credit risk. We are credit takers. That's what we do. That's our business. We're credit risk takers as an industry. We absorb the credit risk, the loss of the housing market. Whether you do at the point of sale or not doesn't matter. Everything you do is reflected in that by the loans you offer, the rate they're at, et cetera. And zero default is an absurdity, right? You shouldn't, if you price and mark your credit to having no losses, you're not going to do any loans either. And unfortunately, I think today, to the point of breaking plates, we are seeing the market really skew to a much higher FICO, demographically much whiter, white non-Hispanic home ownership rate. And you're seeing African-American home ownership rates continue to slowly, unfortunately, drop in basis points to where we're at the lowest we've been. We're back to where we were 40 years ago in terms of home ownership rates for Black Americans. And so all of this to say that, there has to be a discussion around breaking some plates and what's reasonable in that regard. Because the GSEs collect G fees for a reason, right? They got to cover G&A, make a reasonable profit, and cover credit losses. And they're far exceeding that. Same with the FHA program. And if they're not taking losses, then that portion of the G fee is an overcharge that is, frankly, they're taking at the advantage of what could be home ownership in the country. And I think it's the way kind of like policymakers are thinking about it.
And so do we see any changes in the future, or is this the status quo that we're going to deal with for the foreseeable future?
No, I think this is where you're going to see some changes. Don't expect dramatic changes. I know we all want to see like 3% rates tomorrow, but marginal changes of a quarter here in an MIP or 50 basis points will force the GSEs to think about how they're doing some pricing, some targeted price changes to improve access to home ownership for first-time home buyers. I think is likely. I mean, Sandra's actions on second homes and investor loans was explicit in an effort to transition the GSEs to focus more on entry level, but they haven't completed that job. I would encourage you to look at what's going to happen with FICO scores.
Okay.
I think we're going to see an answer around whether there should be another credit scoring model that they test. I think you'll see more explicit efforts there because she went out for requests for information, and all of us provided information to Director Thompson. I can't call her Sandra. Director Thompson and the leadership of FHFA on how that could be done. But these are all efforts to try to expand the box, and then it's not going to relieve independent mortgage bankers, because I know that there are efforts in play right now to hold independent mortgage bankers accountable to meet some standard. You can't call it CRA, but to meet some standard that obligates them to have an affordable lending mix, so that they just can't hide from it. You can't have independent mortgage bankers doing 80% of the business and not have some form of affordable obligation that's measured. So I think all of this is coming our way.
Oh boy, that's another conversation for another day, but that's a real big one. Yeah. What's going on with independent mortgage bankers and everything that I'm reading right now. But just understand, guys, everything is moving at the pace of government. It's like it's like walking through the world in 30 weight oil. You just go a little bit.
Exactly.
Hey, Dave, listen, I totally appreciate you doing this. Whenever you make time for us, I just appreciate it. It's great. These are my favorite conversations to have. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian. Always been good. Always good being with you.
All right, man.
Take care, dude.
Talk to you soon.